In 1994, 12 children boarded a school bus headed for Willow's Reach Lighthouse and never came back. No crash, no wreckage, no footprints, just silence. For years, people whispered about the cliff and the fog and the storm that rolled in that night. But decades later, after a storm ripped open part of the bluff, a fisherman found something buried beneath the lighthouse. And what we uncovered, what I saw with my own eyes, was not just a tragedy. It was a choice. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury. And make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Emily Ward. I'm 39 now. I was 10 the day my brother Tommy vanished. I grew up in Willow's Reach, a small town tucked against the Maine coast, where the fog never fully lifts and the sea always feels just a little too close. Back then, everything in my life felt settled. Mom worked the breakfast shift at Helen's Diner. Dad fixed boats down at the harbor before he left us. I spent most of my time riding bikes with Tommy or reading dog-eared paperbacks from the school library. We lived in a clapboard house just 2 blocks from the cliffs. You could see the top of the lighthouse from my bedroom window, especially in the early morning when the light still blinked. It hadn't been an active Coast Guard station in years, but folks liked the way it looked, a kind of charm, I guess. Something steady. That's how we thought of it anyway. Steady. The town was small enough that nobody locked their doors during the day. We all knew each other's names, faces, routines. That was the kind of place Willow's Reach was in '94. Safe, predictable, or at least we told ourselves that. Looking back, I should have noticed how the adults spoke in half sentences when certain names came up. How folks would change the subject if someone mentioned the storms, or how nobody really liked going up near the lighthouse unless they had to. I thought they were just old stories, warnings to keep kids from climbing the rocks or breaking curfew, and maybe they were. At first, Tommy was 12 that summer, bleach blonde from the sun, always with dirt on his jeans and a baseball in his back pocket. He was the kind of kid teachers trusted too much and never kept in for recess. He had this way of making everything feel like an adventure. Especially that morning. He was so excited about the field trip. I remember he packed his own lunch, wrote his name on the bag in big marker letters like it might get lost. That was the last time I saw him. After the buses pulled away, I walked back inside and helped Mom with the dishes. It was just another Thursday. The sky was blue, no wind. No one knew the storm was coming. But later that night, just after sunset, the air turned strange. Heavy. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I remember Mom stepping out onto the porch and staring toward the cliffs like she was waiting for something. Her mouth opened just slightly like she wanted to say something but changed her mind. That was the first time I felt it, like something was shifting under the ground or maybe inside us. We didn't have words for it back then, just an ache in the chest, a kind of dread that settled in and never really left. The next morning, I woke to an empty kitchen. No cereal bowl, no notes on the counter. Just the phone ringing, and my mother's voice upstairs, sharp and low, in a way I didn't recognize. Something had happened. The children. They hadn't come home. And that was only the beginning. We didn't know it yet, but that morning marked the last time anyone would see the 12 of them. By the time the fog cleared and the sun finally broke through the next day, the school bus was gone. No calls, no search alerts. No one made it home. At first, people assumed the trip had been delayed. Maybe the storm rolled in early, or the driver turned back and took them somewhere safe to wait it out. But by late afternoon, parents were pacing the sidewalks, checking their watches, calling the school. No one picked up. By sunset, the first patrol cars were out combing the roads between the school and the lighthouse. And I still remember the sound of my mother's voice when she got the call. It wasn't a scream, not even a cry. Just a single breath she let out sharp enough to cut through the whole house. What followed was days of helicopters, K-9 units, volunteers combing the cliffs. Divers went down into the bay. Officers climbed every inch of that lighthouse. But there was nothing. No wreckage. No torn fabric on the brush. No signs that 12 kids and one driver had ever been there. What they did find 2 days later was the bus parked neat and dry in the turnaround at the top of the bluff, doors shut, keys still in the ignition. Not a mark on it. That was the moment people stopped using the word accident. The search stretched on through that first week, then 2. After a month, it turned quiet. No more updates. The posters stayed up, but the search teams thinned out. I was 10, but I remember the exact moment it sank in. We were never going to see Tommy again. His shoes were still lined up under our coat rack, one lace always knotted wrong the way he tied them. For months, I'd stare at that lopsided loop and try to believe he was still coming back through the door. But something had shifted in town. You could feel it. The way people crossed the street instead of talking. How the lighthouse started to look more like a wound than a landmark. And the storm, whatever rolled in that night, people never talked about it the same way again. Nobody said it was just weather. I left Willow's Reach when I was 17, got a diving scholarship out of state, and never really came back. Not for long. Mom stayed in the house, ran the diner until her back gave out. We talked shore, but mostly about the safe stuff, whether groceries work. Tommy's name didn't come up. Not because we didn't care, but because it hurt in a way neither of us knew how to carry. For a long time, I tried to let it go. I moved cities, changed jobs, got older. But every now and then, something would slip through a lighthouse on a postcard, a child's voice in the fog, and I'd feel it all press back in. Then, 25 years after that field trip, a storm came off the Atlantic. I wasn't home. I was up north on a dive survey off the edge of a kelp forest, working with a university team, when my phone buzzed inside the dry bag. One of those vague notifications, unidentified, remains found potential link to a cold case. The location hit me like a punch. Willow's Reach. I barely remember packing. I just remember the drive gray roads, rain on the windshield, my brother's face frozen in the rear view of my memory. He was 12 in that photo they used, smiling but not fully, like he knew something was coming. By the time I got into town, it was dusk. The fog hadn't lifted. The whole place looked just like I left it. Houses hunched close together. Fishing lines coiled on porches, the lighthouse still there at the edge of the cliffs. But something in the air was different. You could feel it in the way people gathered near the police tape, their voices low, their eyes not meeting. Sheriff Beth Hammond met me at the edge of the bluff. She looked older than I remembered, deeper lines around her mouth, but her voice was the same. She didn't ask how I was, just said, "You need to see this." They'd found a chamber hidden behind a rusted iron door, exposed after the cliff face gave way during the storm. At first, folks thought it was just a sinkhole or a cave. But when Eddie Carson, a local fisherman, spotted a line of children's shoes neatly arranged in the dust, things changed fast. Forensics had already been through by the time I got there. The smell inside was thick with salt and something sweet, like mold and old iron. The shoes were still there, each pair tagged and bagged. On the wall, someone had written a message in what looked like dried blood. We were chosen to keep the light. We never left. I recognized Tommy's shoes immediately, still tied the same way. That sloppy knot. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until a tech touched my arm and led me deeper into the chamber. That's when I saw it, a faded lunchbox, the kind he used to carry stickers peeling. And inside it, a Polaroid. 12 kids, arms around each other, standing in front of the lighthouse. Smiling. June 14th, 1994. Written on the back, "If anyone finds us, keep the light burning. Please remember our names." The next morning, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, staring out the window trying to make sense of what I'd seen. She hadn't changed much. Same floral curtains, same ticking wall clock, but the air in the house felt thinner. I found myself tracing Tommy's photo again and again, my finger resting on his smile. Then there was a knock. Beth stood on the porch, her face grim. "Didn't want to call," she said. But something else came up. "You need to see it." Back at the site, one of the deputies, a woman named Jessa, handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small blue notebook, the cover curled from water damage. My breath caught. It was Tommy's, a gift from our grandfather the summer before he disappeared. I used to watch him scribble in it during long car rides, drawing little mazes or song lyrics. The writing inside started out like that. But somewhere halfway through it changed. The words got messy, the lines uneven. "The keeper comes at midnight. Don't look at the light. If you stay quiet, he passes by. The shoes have to stay in the circle. If you step out, you don't come back." Beth leaned in. Was he the type to make up stories? I shook my head. No, not like this. Jessa turned a few pages and showed us something else. A crude map of the cliffs, the lighthouse, a star marking the chamber. And beside it, a drawing. A tall figure with a lantern for a head. Children huddled beneath it. I whispered the word before I could stop myself. The keeper. Later that afternoon, I walked the bluff alone. The wind had picked up sharp with sea spray. I stood near the chain-link fence where we used to lean as kids, daring each other to go closer to the edge. That's when I heard it soft, almost a hum. A child's voice singing an old camp song. I turned, saw nothing. But just for a moment I thought I saw movement near the lighthouse steps. Small, quick, gone before I could blink. I ran toward it, boots sliding in the damp grass, heart pounding in my ears. But when I reached the door, there was nothing. Just the path, and my breath in the cold air. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid everything out on the table, Tommy's notebook, the Polaroid, the list of names. 12 of them. I wrote each one down, trying to match them to faces I half remembered from school assemblies and birthday parties. I kept thinking about the message on the wall, the drawings, the circle. It didn't feel random. It didn't feel like an accident. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Ben Foster, the local reporter, someone I'd known since we were kids. "Meet me at the lighthouse." I found something. I grabbed my jacket and drove through the fog. Ben was waiting with a flashlight in one hand and a key in the other. "My uncle was on the search party back then," he said. "They never checked the old keeper's quarters. Said it was locked and no one figured kids would have gone in. He held up the key. He kept this. The two of us climbed the spiral stairs in silence. The wood groaned under our weight. The air was colder the higher we went. At the top, Ben unlocked the door. The room inside hadn't been touched in decades. A narrow cot, a desk, maps curling on the wall. But carved into the plaster was a message. We were chosen. The light must stay. And beneath it, 12 tally marks. There was a box under the desk. Inside, more Polaroids. Some blurry, others sharp. Faces I recognized. Some crying. Some staring. One of them was Tommy, looking straight at the camera. On the back, written in shaky hand, "He's coming. Don't let the light go out." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The wind rattled the glass above us, and somewhere far below I thought I heard that same tune. The camp song, slowed down, warped, echoing back from somewhere I hadn't dared look yet. And that's when I realized we hadn't found the end of this story. We'd found the beginning. When I came down from the lighthouse that night, the wind had shifted. You could feel it along your skin, something cold and watchful like the air itself was holding its breath. Ben walked beside me in silence, his flashlight beam jittering along the gravel path. Neither of us said much. I think we were both trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. The names carved into the plaster, the tally marks, the photographs, especially that one of Tommy. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like something left behind on purpose, not to be found by police or reporters, just by someone who remembered. The next morning I went to the sheriff's office. I brought the Polaroids, the notebook, the map. Beth Hammond sat behind her desk with her reading glasses halfway down her nose. She looked at every item carefully, didn't speak for a long time. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "We're treating this as an open investigation, but I want you to be careful how you talk about this in town." I didn't understand what she meant, so I asked her straight. "Beth, are you saying not to tell anyone?" She didn't answer right away, just folded her hands and looked out the window. "People around here, she said they've lived with this for a long time. Some don't want it stirred back up, and some don't believe it ever happened the way it did." That was the first moment I realized how deep this went. I thought maybe people would be relieved to finally have something real, a clue, a place, a trace of what we'd all lost. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like resistance. I went down to the harbor later that afternoon, hoping to talk to folks who'd lived here through it. I stopped by the bait shop, the diner, the post office. Each time I mentioned the storm damage, the chamber, the shoes. Some people just nodded and changed the subject. Others looked me in the eye and said things like, "You really ought to let the dead rest, Emily," or "There's no good in pulling up what the sea already took." Not one of them asked what we'd found. That night I sat with the Polaroid again. I kept flipping it over. The message on the back had started to fade. "Keep the light burning. Please remember our names." I read it over and over like it might shift into something clearer. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. "Found something in the archive room. You'll want to see it." I met him the next morning at the old library. It still smelled like it always had dust and paper and old wood polish. He was waiting at a back table with a cardboard box. Inside were town records, council meeting minutes, property maps. But he handed me a diary, soft blue cover, water-damaged edges. It was tucked behind a loose stone in the chamber, he said. Forensics missed it first pass, but Jessa found it this morning. The name on the inside cover stopped me cold. Property of Sarah Lindholm. Room 3B. I remembered her. Small, quiet, always trailed behind the group. Her family moved away the summer after the disappearances. No one really knew what happened to them. I sat down and opened the diary. The entries started off normal. Descriptions of the trip, the fog, the field behind the lighthouse. Then they changed. The tone grew jagged. The writing slanted hard to the right. The keeper came again last night. Tommy says if we stay together, we're safe. I don't believe him. We sing the song, but it feels wrong. Like we're trying to keep something in. Another entry read, he watches when the light flickers. If the shoes move, he gets angry. We don't sleep much now. I hear the sea inside the walls. There were drawings, too. Circles of children holding hands. A tall figure with a glowing head. A spiral staircase that led nowhere. I didn't say anything for a while. Just sat with the book in my lap. Then Ben said, "This isn't just one kid's imagination. Look at the pattern." He flipped to the back where Sarah had written a list 12 names, beside each a date. The first few were spaced 1 or 2 days apart. The rest had blank spaces. Those early dates, he said, they matched the first week after the field trip, when the news still thought maybe they were just lost in the woods. I looked up. "You think the children vanished one by one?" He didn't answer. He just nodded slowly. Later that afternoon, Beth met us at the site. She looked tired but resolute. We showed her the diary, the names, the entries about the keeper. Her jaw tightened as she read. "We're running prints and DNA on everything she said, but I need you both to understand this goes deeper than we thought. I've already had a man from Portland call me, said his brother disappeared out here in the 70s. County's bringing in a team tomorrow. We won't be the only ones asking questions anymore." That evening, I walked to the lighthouse alone. I stood at the base and looked up at the dark windows. The beam hadn't worked in years, but I could have sworn I saw a faint glimmer in the top lens, like someone had lit a match and held it to the glass. I didn't go inside. Not yet. I just stood there until the wind picked up and the light faded out again. When I got back to the house, I found myself pulling out old school photos, trying to remember every child's name from the trip. I didn't want to forget anyone. Then, just before bed, my phone rang. It was Beth. Her voice was low, steady. "You need to come to the clinic. Now." I grabbed my coat and met her in the driveway. The rain had started again. We drove in silence. At the clinic, the nurse at the front desk nodded us through. "She's sleeping," she said. "But she's alive. Or something close." I followed Beth down the hallway. In the last room, a woman lay curled on the hospital bed, skin, pale hair, tangled. She looked about 30, maybe younger. But the field trip was in 1994. That would make her over 40. I stepped closer. Her eyes fluttered open, pale blue, almost silvery in the light. She looked at me without recognition, then whispered, "Is it morning?" I nodded. "What's your name?" Her voice was barely audible. "Sarah. My name is Sarah Lindholm." The nurse stepped out to give us a moment. I sat beside the bed and took her hand. She flinched, then held on tight. "Do you remember what happened?" I asked. She closed her eyes like she was trying to hold something back. "There was a storm. The keeper said the ritual was broken. I tried to keep the light on, but the matches were wet. I ran, but every door led back to the same place." She opened her eyes again. "Is Tommy here?" My breath caught. "He said he wouldn't leave me." I shook my head. "He's not here, but I am." She started crying, then quiet, frightened tears that soaked the blanket. "Please," she said, "don't let the light go out." Outside, the wind scraped along the siding, and somewhere down the hall a phone rang. I didn't answer it. I just sat there holding her hand and whispering the names I could still remember. One by one, until the storm passed, or started again. Sarah stayed at the clinic under observation, but her body kept the rhythm of another place. She'd sleep in short bursts, waking with a jolt or whispering names that didn't match any chart. I sat with her as often as I could, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock and the hush of rubber soles moving past in the hallway. She was thin, worn down like she'd been scrubbed by time, but not completely erased. Sometimes she'd open her eyes and seem present, tracking the light through the blinds, the sound of my voice. Other times, she'd drift again, eyes half-lidded, murmuring things I couldn't quite piece together. The nurses didn't press her, and neither did I. But I kept the diary with me, folded and dog-eared, reading it cover to cover, like it might anchor her to here. By the third afternoon, the rain hadn't let up. I stood by the window while she dozed, watching water streak down the glass, the edges of Willow's reach blurred behind it. Then, without opening her eyes, Sarah said, "He's still there." I turned, but she wasn't speaking to me exactly. Her voice was small flat. "I hear them singing, even now." I pulled the chair closer and sat down, my voice low. "Can you tell me what you remember? After the storm." She was quiet for a while. Then slowly, like it was unspooling from some place deep, she began. "It started with the rain." She said it beat against the windows like it was trying to get in. They had been told to stay together, to sit in a circle and keep the light on. The keeper watched from the edge of the room, tall and still, face never fully visible. Sometimes his lamp swayed gently, casting long, warped shadows across the stone. He never spoke loud. His voice was soft, nearly kind. "You must keep the circle. The light must not fail. You belong to the tide now." They sang a song, something simple with a lilt, like a lullaby. It was meant to keep them steady, she said. A chant to keep the dark from noticing. But it didn't always work. One by one the circle would break. A hand would slip. A child would cough or cry. And then the keeper would move. Not fast, not loud, just move. And one of them would be gone. No sound, no struggle, just an empty space in the circle where someone had been. "Tommy," she said, kept trying to hold them together. He sang louder when the others got tired. He passed around the last bites of food. He told stories he barely remembered, just to keep their minds from unraveling. When someone faltered, he squeezed their hand. "Don't let go, Sarah. Not for anything." She said he promised her they'd see their parents again, that the storm would end, that help was coming. But the nights got longer. The keeper more impatient. Then came the night the light flickered and died. The lamp which had burned steadily for days sputtered. They scrambled looking for matches, candles, anything. Sarah said Tommy ran to the far side of the chamber where a second lantern sat unused. He struck a match, but it went out. All of them did. The keeper didn't yell. He simply said, "The circle is broken. The tide is coming." After that, she ran. Not with her feet, she couldn't explain it, but through doors that didn't make sense, hallways that didn't stay put. She said it was like being inside the lighthouse, but twisted corridors that looped rooms that led back into themselves. She never saw daylight, just that same sickly glow and the echo of singing far away. Sometimes she'd glimpse the others, pale outlines, familiar voices. Sometimes she heard the keeper's footsteps, slow and scraping, but never close. She didn't know how long it lasted. The days bled together. But that morning, she said the door opened. Just once. And behind it, sand wind, the smell of salt and light that didn't hum. I didn't speak right away. Her eyes were closed again. Her hand trembled faintly against the blanket. I sat there a while longer, then stepped into the hall. Beth and Ben were waiting outside. Neither said a word until I closed the door. Then Ben leaned in. "If she came out near South Beach, there's got to be a way in. A passage we missed." I nodded. Tommy's map showed more than just the chamber. There were marks under the school near the old foundation, even the keeper's quarters. If she found a way out, maybe the rest of them. I didn't finish the sentence. Ben didn't ask me to. That night I met him at the bluff. The wind was sharp off the water. The path to the lighthouse was slick, the rocks around it dark with moss and spray. We didn't speak much, just moved quietly. Inside the keeper's room we started looking. Every board, every seam in the wall. The air was still, damp, like the whole room was waiting for something. Then I found it near the desk, a jagged seam behind the old wall map. I pressed gently. The panel shifted just enough to reveal a narrow stone stairwell spiraling down into black. We didn't pause long. Ben clicked on his flashlight and I followed close behind. The air grew colder the farther we descended. At the base of the stairs, the passage split. The walls were old stone curved with salt-stained bricks and streaks of water that hadn't dried in decades. On one side, someone, maybe a child, had scrawled a message in chalk, barely visible. "Keep the circle. Don't let the light go out." We moved slowly, our footsteps muffled against old grit and something softer fabric maybe. Debris. Further in, we found side chambers, cots rotting in the corners, rusted pipes along the ceilings. I kept my eyes on the floor, afraid of what else we'd see. Then, in one narrow alcove, I found a name scratched into the wall. Tommy Ward. Written over and over the way a child might write lines on a blackboard. I pressed my hand to the stone. It was cold, but dry. And in that moment, I thought just for a second I heard his voice. Faint. A hum. "If the keeper comes, don't make a sound." Ben stepped beside me. "We're not alone down here," he said quietly. I didn't disagree. We moved deeper into the passage, our lights catching flickers of things half buried, a doll's leg, a school patch. Pieces of what looked like old notebooks melted together by time. Then the tunnel opened up into a room I hadn't expected. Larger, rounder, like a gathering place. On one wall, 12 hooks. Empty. Opposite, a mural half-finished. Circles of children. A spiral lighthouse. And at the center, a figure with a head of light. I stepped closer. Tucked into the edge of the mural was a scrap of folded paper. I opened it carefully. The writing was smeared, but I could still read it. We're still here. The keeper is angry. If you find this, please remember our names. It was signed Tommy. My chest tightened. The edges of the page trembled in my fingers. I wasn't ready for what that meant. Not yet. We turned to go, but before we could move, another light appeared down the corridor. Small, unsteady. A child's voice echoed thin and panicked. "Hello, Mom. Is anyone there?" Ben swore under his breath. "That's Jamie Miller. She's 11. Her family's renting the Bower house this summer." I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't even alive in '94. "She shouldn't be down here," he said. "None of this should be happening." We followed her voice, calling her name. The tunnel curved again, and we found her crouched in a corner, knees drawn to her chest, flashlight clutched in shaking hands. "I got lost," she whispered. "I heard singing. I thought it was my brother, but I couldn't find the way back." Ben scooped her up gently while I checked her for scrapes. Nothing serious, but her hands were like ice. We retraced our path, but the tunnel twisted differently now. The stairwell was gone, or moved. We followed airflow until we spotted daylight, thin and dusty, bleeding through a grate high in the wall. Ben got it loose, and one by one we climbed through, emerging behind the old school. Jamie clung to her mother in the parking lot, crying too hard to speak. Beth pulled me aside. "That's the third child this summer," she said, voice tight. "Each one said they heard singing. Said they saw a man with a lantern." Ben handed her Tommy's note. "It's starting again," he said, "and the keeper's not finished." Beth nodded once. "Then we find the source. We seal it. And we don't stop until we know what really happened to all 12. The sun was beginning to rise behind the bluff, but the lighthouse stayed dark, and in the wind I could still hear the tail end of the old song floating through the fog. Almost too soft to notice. Almost. After Jamie was safely returned to her parents, Beth had every visible entrance to the tunnels marked for sealing. By noon, the sound of concrete mixers echoed along the bluff, and county crews moved in with rebar and steel mesh. But I didn't feel any safer. I kept thinking about how the tunnels shifted behind us, how the stairwell vanished, how the way out didn't look like the way in. Sealing the entrances felt like patching drywall over a sinkhole. That night I laid out everything again. Tommy's notebook, Sarah's diary, the Polaroid, the scrap of paper we'd found in the mural. I kept rereading Tommy's message. "We're still here. The keeper is angry. If you find this, please remember our names." And I couldn't stop thinking about how Sarah described the circle, the way they had to stay inside it, the song they had to sing. I felt like I was trying to map out a dream with nothing but shadows and guesses. The next morning, Ben called. He'd been digging through old files his father left behind, boxes of newspaper clippings, old journals, letters. Nobody ever mailed. He met me outside the diner. Eyes, tired hands full of photocopies. "The more I look," he said, "the more it lines up." We spread the pages out on the hood of his car. One article was from 1952, local boy missing after storm, last seen near lighthouse. Another from 1973. 2 hikers vanish during summer squall. Search ends without leads. Every 21 years. Always mid-June. Always around a storm. I scanned the dates. 52, 73, 94, and now 2025. Back at the house, I opened Sarah's diary again and found a page I hadn't noticed before tucked between 2 loose entries nearly stuck to the binding. On it was a crude sketch of the lighthouse drawn from above with a star marked where we'd found the underground chamber. But in the top corner, Sarah had drawn something else, a symbol that looked like a sun with lines stretching out from it. Underneath, she'd written one line in all caps, "The light keeps him in." I sat with that for a long time. I kept hearing her voice in the clinic. If the light goes out, we're lost forever. I didn't know yet what that meant, but I had the feeling we'd been reading everything backward. Maybe it hadn't been about keeping something out. Maybe it was about keeping something contained. I brought the page to Ben and Beth. We sat in the station conference room, maps and photos spread across the table. Beth had already requested records from the old town council. She'd started reviewing names from past storm events, comparing incident reports. But what we needed wasn't in the files. It was in the people. Ben had a lead, Sarah's Aunt Margaret Atwood, who'd moved back to town after her sister passed. She agreed to meet us at the church, said it couldn't wait. The sanctuary was cold. The paint along the windowsills had peeled in long strips, and the pew cushions were sun-faded and flat. Margaret sat near the altar, her shoulders stiff, a folded handkerchief in her lap. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were alert, watchful. When we asked about Sarah, she nodded slowly. After that field trip, Sarah changed, she said. She stopped talking during the day, but at night she'd wake up screaming, kept saying the man with the lantern was watching her, that the light had to stay on or the tide would come. She drew that lighthouse over and over. I handed her the diary. She ran her fingers over the cover like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she opened it and pressed a palm to her mouth. She used to write this at night under her blanket, she said. I'd take the pencils away, but she'd always find another. She said if she didn't write it down, she'd forget how to stay safe. Ben asked her if Sarah ever said what the ritual was. Margaret shook her head. Just pieces. They had to sing, hold hands, keep the shoes in a circle. She said the keeper would only come if someone stepped outside the light. She paused. She never said what happened when they did. Only that once the circle broke, you couldn't fix it. We left the church in silence. Margaret stayed seated, staring at the stained glass above the pulpit. I didn't look back. Later that evening, I returned to the lighthouse with Ben. We made our way up to the keeper's quarters and started searching again. The room still smelled of mildew and old wood. The lantern glass was smudged. On a hunch, I knelt by the desk and started checking the floorboards. One felt loose. I pried it up, careful not to splinter the wood, and reached inside. My hand closed around something small and cold. A music box, the kind with a little key on the bottom. I turned it once, and it started to play the same tune we'd heard in the tunnels. Slow, warped, but familiar. The old camp song, the one Sarah remembered, the one Jamie said she followed. Inside the lid, there was a slip of paper, handwritten, barely legible. The ritual is broken. The keeper is angry. Don't let the light go out. Don't forget our names. We were here. We are still here. I passed it to Ben, who read it without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "If this was left here intentionally, maybe it was a warning. Or maybe a reminder." The storm had started again outside, wind pressing against the glass, making the frame groan. I watched the light spin once, then stop. But the bulb didn't flicker. It hadn't worked in years. There shouldn't have been light at all. That night I made a list. All 12 names. I wrote them out on a yellow notepad, same order as they appeared in the Polaroid. I lit a candle and whispered each one slowly, careful not to miss a syllable. And then I added Sarah's name at the bottom along with a question mark. I didn't know what to do with that part of it yet. Only that she'd come back somehow, and that meant the others might still be close, caught in whatever that place was beneath the cliffs, still trying to finish the circle, still holding on. The next morning, Ben met me at the town library. Mrs. Haskell, the archivist, had found something an old logbook, black cloth-bound, tucked in with lighthouse maintenance records. She slid it across the table like she didn't want to touch it again. I opened to the first page, property of Elias March, keeper of the Light Willow's Reach. The entries started simple weather conditions, fuel levels, shipping notices. But slowly the handwriting shifted. Sharper strokes, more erratic grammar, storm coming, children laughing in the night. She says I must keep the light burning or the tide will take them. I looked up at Ben, who was already turning the next page. The council came again. Said the time was near. The boy wouldn't hold hands. They took him anyway. I heard him singing in the dark after. God forgive me. I am only the keeper. Ben looked at me. The council. He tapped the entry. That's not just superstition. They believed this. They acted on it. I nodded. And whatever they started, it never really ended. We read on. More entries about rituals. Children chosen. The tide as a kind of force or punishment. The tone of the entries grew panicked, like March was losing time or losing control. The final page was blank, but on the inside back cover in smaller handwriting a name I hadn't seen before, Dal Rimprimple. I closed the book slowly. We need to find her, I said, if she's still alive. Ben pulled out his phone. She's in town, still listed. Says she's at the edge of the square. I'll call Beth. I slid the logbook into my bag. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The air tasted like salt and metal. Another storm was moving in, and if what we'd read was right, the timing wasn't coincidence. We didn't say much as we left the library. But I noticed something I hadn't before: chalk drawings on the sidewalk near the school, childlike loops of the lighthouse, the sea, 12 dots drawn in a ring. Someone had written, "Keep the circle in pink" beside it, the letters half washed away by last night's rain. I didn't speak. I just reached into my coat pocket, tightened my grip on the notepad, and kept walking. We weren't finished yet. And the next storm was already here. Dal Rimprimple lived alone at the edge of town in a white house that looked like it had been built to withstand something far worse than weather. Every shutter was bolted down. The porch slanted slightly left. We rang the bell once, twice, and when there was no answer, Beth knocked firm, but respectful. After a pause, we heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. Then the latch unhooked from the inside. Dal was in her 80s hair pinned back in tight silver rows, eyes sharp as glass. She looked at us through the screen door and said, "You're here about the keeper, aren't you? Not a question, just fact." We nodded. She didn't invite us in right away, just stood there holding the door frame like she was measuring whether we were worth the truth. Inside the house smelled like cedar and boiled tea. No family pictures on the walls, just old maps of the coastline, newspaper clippings tacked to corkboard, and a single framed photograph of the lighthouse before the top lantern room had rusted through. She led us to the back room where papers were laid out on a long oak table typed minutes from town council meetings dating back to the 1930s, reports of missing children from neighboring towns, even handwritten notes in faded ink with phrases I didn't recognize. She moved with care, but no hesitation. She'd been expecting this moment. Maybe not from us, maybe not this year, but she knew it was coming. Dal told us she'd served on the council back in the 70s when the town still kept 2 books, one for public record and one locked away in the archive basement. We were told we were preserving tradition, she said, protecting the town from bad luck. It always started with a storm, always came in late spring or early summer. Children would vanish, not many. Just enough to explain away runaways, accidents, spirited off, as they used to say. But it was a pattern. She brought out a leather-bound ledger and opened to a page marked 1973. 12 names. 11 marked with a small black X. One underlined Sarah Ann March. I blinked. March, as in Elias March. She nodded. His granddaughter. She was the first to come back, and she never spoke again. Ben shifted beside me. You said it started in the 30s. Dal gave a slow nod. Officially. But I've read council minutes going back to the 1800s. There's talk of a presence, of a voice under the cliffs, of bargains made. Her hands were steady as she folded the page closed. The lighthouse was never just a lighthouse. It was a lock. And someone always had to turn the key. She looked at me, then eyes fixed. Elias thought he was protecting the town. But what he really did was build a door. And the children, they were the cost of keeping it shut. We sat with that in silence. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall and the faint sound of rain starting again outside. Beth finally asked, "Why now? Why is it starting again?" Dal hesitated, then opened a small wooden box from the shelf. Inside was a rusted key, a circle of smooth stones, and a slip of cloth embroidered with 12 small stars. Because the lock is weakening, because we sealed the tunnels, because the old protections, whatever they were tied to rituals we don't understand anymore. And someone broke the pattern. As we left, she gave me the cloth. "Don't forget their names," she said. "Not just your brothers. All of them. That's what keeps them tethered. What keeps him at bay." I didn't ask who him meant. I already knew. We drove in silence back toward the school. The sun had dipped low light cutting through the mist in long golden bands. I could see the lighthouse from the road. Still dark, still watching. That night I returned alone. I needed to see for myself. The trail to the bluff was slick again, salt clinging to the grass in fine mist. I moved slow flashlight low to the ground boots, sinking slightly in soft soil. The door to the keeper's quarters opened without a sound. Inside, the air was stale and cold. I crossed to the back wall where we'd found the passage before, but it was sealed. No panel, no seam, just stone. I stepped back, listening. Nothing. Then I turned toward the hearth. There, tucked behind a loose brick, was a cloth pouch similar to the one Dal had shown us. I opened it and found 12 polished stones, each carved with a single initial, TSMA. The rest followed. I arranged them on the table just as they were stitched into the cloth. When I finished, the floor beneath the table shifted with a faint groan. I crouched down, found a recessed handle, and pulled. A trapdoor opened, revealing a narrow shaft of stairs winding down into dark. This wasn't the path we'd found before. This was older, drier, carved directly into bedrock. I clicked my light on and descended, counting each step, 32 in all. At the base was a low tunnel round, ribbed with wooden braces so old they cracked under my weight. The walls were damp but smooth, almost polished. I followed the curve, turning left where it bent, then right again. Finally, I reached a door. Wood reinforced with iron. The kind of door that shouldn't still exist. I pressed my ear to it. No sound. I turned the handle slowly, heart steady, and pushed it open. Inside was a circular chamber, low-ceilinged with a shallow depression in the center. Around the edges, 12 stone stools formed a ring. Atop each was a pair of shoes, small, worn clearly from another time. And at the center of the ring, carved deep into the stone floor, was the same sun symbol from Sarah's diary. The light keeps him in. Above it hung a single chain broken halfway down, like it once held a lantern that had long since fallen. I stepped closer. The air felt charged thick in my lungs, humming faintly at the base of my skull. I reached down to touch one of the shoes, and the air shifted. Not colder, but deeper. Like the room had exhaled. From somewhere behind me, I heard the faint scrape of wood on stone. I turned, but the doorway was empty. Then, faintly from the far side of the chamber, a voice, thin, uncertain, and young Emily. My heart stopped. It was Tommy. Not a recording, not a memory. His voice as I remembered it, tired, confused, alive. I crossed the chamber, scanning every corner. "Tommy," I called. "It's me. I'm here." The voice didn't come again. But in the far wall I found another passage, half collapsed, barely wide enough to crawl through. On the stone beside it, scratched into the wall, were 4 words. "Still here. Not gone." I sank to my knees, hand flat against the stone. It was warm. Not with heat, but with presence. Something passed through it. Or was still passing through. I stood slowly backing away from the wall. I didn't call his name again. I didn't touch the shoes. I left the stones where they were, and I climbed back out into the night. The wind had picked up. The trees along the bluff bent westward, and the path behind me seemed narrower than I remembered. I didn't look back. I just walked one step at a time until the lighthouse was behind me, and the stars had started to show again, dull and scattered behind thin cloud. Back at the house, I lit the candle again and laid out the cloth. 12 names, 12 stones. I added a 13th. Tommy's name in full. Not as a memory, as a promise. Tomorrow I'd return. Not alone this time. And this time I'd be ready to go deeper. Because wherever he was, whatever held them, I knew now he hadn't let go. And neither would I. We met just before sunrise. Beth brought 2 deputies and emergency radios. Ben had a printed map of the cliffside grid and a pack slung over his shoulder. I had the stones, the cloth, Tommy's photo, and the key from Dal's pouch tucked into my coat pocket. The light above the bluff hadn't turned since last winter, but as we parked near the ranger post, something in the windows flickered, a dull, rhythmic glow, almost like the lantern room was pulsing from the inside out. Nobody spoke. Not on the walk up the trail, not as we reached the old keeper's quarters. Just the crunch of boots on gravel and the whistle of wind pushing inland. Beth unlocked the outer door. It opened easy, almost like it had been waiting. We moved fast but quiet. I led them to the trap door beneath the table, showed them where the stones had triggered the mechanism. The deputies exchanged a glance, but Beth just nodded. She gestured for one to stay topside, then followed me down the stairs. This time I counted every step aloud. 32. The same. The hallway beyond was still intact, still dry. But something had changed. The air felt warmer, denser, like we'd dropped beneath something living. At the end of the corridor, I stopped at the heavy door. "This is where I heard him," I said. "Tommy." Ben stepped forward and placed his hand on the handle. "Then this is where we start." The chamber hadn't shifted. The 12 stools, the shoes, the carved sun in the center, they were all exactly as I'd left them. But the ring of stones that once lay scattered at the edge was gone. Just an outline remained pale against the darker stone. Beth moved carefully, her flashlight panning across the ceiling. "You smell that," she said. It was faint, but there, like matches burned too long, like something scorched and sealed. I placed the cloth in the center. One by one, I set each stone where it belonged, tracing the same pattern Sarah had drawn in her diary. When I reached the 13th, I hesitated. Ben watched me. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "He belongs with them." I set it down. The moment it touched the floor, a low sound like a hum but fuller passed through the room. The deputies drew their flashlights. The chamber trembled just slightly. I knelt and pressed my palm to the center symbol. Warm. Almost pulsing. And then, without warning, the far wall where the collapsed tunnel had been split open. Not crumbled. Split. A clean, vertical line widening into an archway. Beyond it, nothing but dark. We entered slowly, flashlights sweeping side to side. The tunnel beyond was narrower walls lined with shelves. Some held small boxes, others held toys, old ones. Wooden puzzles felt dolls, a slingshot made from bent wire, each marked with initials. I found one with a tag MT. Matthew Thomas, one of the names from the original 12. Ben stepped beside me and pulled a photograph from a high shelf. It was stuck to the wall with wax, black and white. 12 children seated around a campfire. But their faces weren't right. Not blurred, not damaged, just slightly off. Like a second image had been printed faintly over the first. Eyes shifted. Smiles didn't quite match the mouths. We kept walking. The air changed again, cooler, now wet. I could hear dripping, and under that faint singing, childlike, broken into whispers. Then a voice. Young male. We held the circle. We did it right. But he still came. I turned. The deputies had stopped moving. One held his radio up like it might block something. "What is this place?" he asked, voice low. "A memory," I said. "Or a warning." We reached a chamber at the end of the tunnel rounder than the first with walls covered in drawings. some in chalk, others in blood. 12 figures in a ring, one figure outside it, a tall one, holding a lantern. Beneath it scrawled over and over, "Do not break the light. Do not leave the line." Beth found a small opening behind the drawings, like a crawl space, but blocked by rusted bars. Beyond them, water shimmered. A cavern partially flooded with a stone platform rising at the center. And on it, shoes. 13 pairs arranged in a ring. The 13th pair was mine. Not similar. Mine. The sneakers I'd been wearing the day of the picnic. I felt my knees weaken. "He knows," Ben said. "He's waiting." I stepped forward. "I have to go in." Beth grabbed my arm. "Absolutely not. This is evidence, not a rescue mission." I shook my head. "You didn't hear his voice. He's here." Ben moved past both of us and knelt by the bars. "Look," he whispered. "There's someone standing there." And there was. Barely visible but real, shoulders hunched, hands clasped just outside the ring. A boy. Maybe 12. Maybe older. Then his head turned. "Emily," he said. The bars weren't locked, just rusted. I pulled them loose one at a time, ignoring the sting as metal bit into my palms. I slipped through, climbed onto the rocks, crossed the narrow plank to the platform. The boy didn't move. I stepped into the ring of shoes. "Tommy," I said. "It's me." He turned fully now. His face was pale, eyes sunken but clear. Alive. "You came," he whispered. "You remembered." Behind him a glow began to form. Not from flame, not electric, a soft flickering light like lantern fire. The water around us stilled. Beth's voice called from the tunnel, distant now, "Emily. Come back." But I didn't move. Tommy stepped forward. "We didn't mean to break it. It just happened." He pointed to one of the stones. She dropped hers. The girl with the braid. That's when he came. I looked at the shoes again. All pairs intact. All but one, the space where a child should have stood. Empty. And next to it a mark burned into the floor. Not a footprint. A scorch. The glow behind us grew stronger. The air tightened. Tommy gripped my hand. "We can fix it," he said. "But we have to finish it. All of us." His voice cracked. "He's coming back." I looked at the opening, Beth silhouetted against the torchlight, arms outstretched. But I didn't run. I looked at the circle, at the shoes, the stones, the carved sun, and I stepped into place. The moment I did, the chamber echoed with sound. Not music, not voice, just the pressure of something old, like the sea drawing breath. The glow snapped brighter, then vanished. And when it did, so did the tunnel. Everything fell dark. No sound. No light. Just the sensation of standing, of holding a hand. Then a pulse, one beat low and wide like the chime of a bell inside your chest. The light returned. Not around us. Above. I looked up. The lantern in the lighthouse, burning finally after all these years. Then the water receded. The door reopened. And behind it, a voice. Not Tommy's, not mine, but someone older, calmer. A woman's voice, quiet and certain. "They're ready to come home." I turned toward the sound. The chamber was still, the stones were warm, and the 13th pair of shoes was gone. The storm had finally passed, leaving Willow's reach washed clean in the early morning light. News of the discovery and the tunnel exploration had spread faster than I expected. By the time I stepped out of my car, reporters and curious townsfolk had gathered near the lighthouse, faces pale with anticipation and old grief. The sheriff was already there, coordinating with deputies and county officials who were beginning the slow process of officially cataloging what we'd found and what we still didn't understand. But the real moment came when the press and community were invited inside the keeper's quarters, where the truth could no longer be hidden. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the smell of damp stone and salt. The circle of shoes was gone, but photographs of each pair were pinned carefully to the walls alongside the names we had promised to remember. There were letters and tokens placed beneath the lantern room wildflowers, hand-drawn cards, small trinkets from family members who had long waited for closure. I stood beside Ben, watching faces as they read the names aloud. There was no shame or silence this time, only recognition and remembrance. Sarah Lindholm's case became the centerpiece of a wider state investigation. Specialists arrived to study her condition, her memories, and the evidence from the tunnels. She could no longer speak in long sentences, but each day she seemed to grow more aware, her eyes searching for light and music, small miracles after decades lost. Jamie Miller, the girl who had wandered into the tunnels that summer, started drawing lighthouses everywhere, always with 12 small lights glowing inside. It was as if the children had found their own way to tell the story, one that would never be forgotten. Sheriff Hammond reopened every cold case connected to the cliffs and the sea. Names, dates, stories that had been brushed aside suddenly gained new weight. Families who had carried years of silence found others who understood. Dal Rimprimple, frail but resolute, made her last act a full confession to investigators about the rituals, the fears, and the lies that had kept the town trapped in cycles of loss and guilt. Her truth was raw and painful, but it cleared the shadows long enough for light to finally break through. Ben's article was published locally, then nationally, and eventually adapted into a documentary that brought fresh attention and support to the families involved. Yet the words he said he was proudest of weren't headlines or sound bites. They were the simple inscription carved into the plaque that now stood at the lighthouse's base, a permanent memorial to the missing. To those who waited in the dark, your names are remembered. The light is kept. That fall, I packed my things to leave Willow's reach. My mother hugged me tight before I left, whispering that this would always be my home no matter where I went. At the edge of town, I stopped my car and looked back one last time. The lighthouse stood sentinel on the cliffs, its lantern room now shining steady and warm, a beacon of remembrance, not fear. As I pulled away, I caught sight of a group of children playing near the bluff. They held hands in a circle, sunlight casting them almost translucent against the green grass. At the center, Tommy waved his grin wide and real. I smiled through tears and kept driving the road unfolding before me, open and bright. Years later, new children gathered at the lighthouse's base, tracing their names in the dust and telling ghost stories as dusk settled in. Sometimes, when the fog rolled thick and the lantern shone faintly, they said they could hear singing a melody older than memory, full of names and light. The adults only smiled and let them play, knowing the past had been faced, the lost finally come home. Above it all, the lighthouse kept its silent vigil, a promise written in stone and sea. No one here would ever be forgotten again. The morning after the memorial at the lighthouse, the town felt different. There was a quiet in the air, like the weight of years had lifted, even if just a little. Families came together that day, not out of obligation, but out of a shared need to remember. The 12 children who vanished decades ago finally had their names spoken aloud, without fear or shame. Their stories, long buried under silence, were now part of the town's fabric, woven into its very identity. It was healing, slow and imperfect, but real. Sarah Lindholm remained under close care in Portland, her mind slowly piecing together fragments of a life lost. Though she might never fully recover the years stolen from her each morning when she asked for sunlight music or the names of her friends, it was a quiet victory. Jamie Miller, who'd wandered into the tunnels as a child, began to thrive again, drawing lighthouses with 12 glowing lights, a symbol of hope and remembrance. Sheriff Hammond reopened old cases, determined to honor every lost life connected to those cliffs and the sea. The truth was no longer something to hide. Dal Rimprimple's confession to state investigators gave the town a final piece of the puzzle, the acknowledgement of mistakes, fear-driven secrets, and rituals meant to protect, but that instead caused harm. Her willingness to speak out was a turning point for Willow's reach, showing that accountability could come even after decades of silence. Ben's reporting brought the story to a wider audience, but it was the simple plaque beneath the lighthouse etched with the words, "To those who waited in the dark, your names are remembered. The light is kept that carried the deepest meaning." It wasn't just a memorial, it was a promise. Leaving Willow's reach was one of the hardest things I've done. My mother's hug that morning held all the love and loss I felt tangled inside me. But as I looked back at the lighthouse standing tall against the brightening sky, I understood that while the past could never be undone, it could be acknowledged and held with care. The light wasn't just a beacon for ships. It was a symbol of memory, resilience, and the refusal to forget. Years later, I've watched new generations play beneath that same lighthouse, their laughter filling the air once heavy with sorrow. Sometimes when the fog rolls in thick and the lantern glows faintly in the distance, I swear I hear the faintest whisper of children's songs carried on the wind like a promise kept. The past is never truly gone, but it can guide us, teaching us about loss, the strength found in community, and the quiet courage of those who refuse to let darkness claim what is precious. If this story stayed with you, or made you think about someone you've lost, or the importance of remembering, I invite you to share it. Because when names are spoken aloud, when stories are told with care, no one ever truly disappears. And that, I believe, is how we keep the light burning.